So can we please welcome our panel as we start into our conversation. Ashley and Janie, perhaps we'll start with both of you. We had some brilliant provocations by Damien here and some real-world examples as well. What is it that you're seeing in that business space, particularly around trying to change the conversation from the idea that this is not in our economic benefit in particular, perhaps?
First of all, when we started this project, when we went on the streets and we talked to business, they also have very limited idea or actually no understanding of what the circular economy is. So the first thing that we had to do was identify a value proposition for them as a business, and it was different for each of them. Some of them are focused on the environmental side, some on the economic, and others mostly and surprisingly were focused on the social benefit. And I think it's really important that you learn what that value proposition is for each person you talk about with the circular economy, because it is so multifaceted and multidisciplinary. But for an SME, it needs to make business sense for them.
Yeah, fantastic. Have you got one example that comes to mind as well of a company that, or a founder or somebody in that space that thought, yeah, I don't know if this is for me, but they've been compelled because they've seen.
Yeah, definitely. When we had the conversations with the businesses, I don't know if anyone's ever engaged SMEs, but they are very difficult to engage. You can imagine that, serving coffee, serving food, and then you've got to quickly go, hi, I'm here and I'm from the Circular Experiment and I want to talk to you about the circular economy. And they literally think you're talking Chinese. So for us, an example of them coming on board, a couple of weeks now into our project is we created a private Facebook group, we got them on board, we started sharing examples and listening to their concerns. And I think this is where it starts. You have to listen to what's really a pain point for businesses and go and then give them an example how it can be addressed in the circular economy. And one of those was actually cigarette butts on the street, and it might seem like that's very disconnected from a circular economy. But one of the principles in our project is Incentivized Return, which is a principle of the circular economy. And that was, how do you get people to want to stay in a place, in a street, and foster community and make it, amiable? So we actually looked at that as a concern, and we got a ballot bin which gamifies cigarette litter. And the businesses are now like, I get this. I'm starting to see that people are coming back. There's less complaints about cigarette butts. It's starting to make a difference.
Great, fantastic example. Luke, maybe we'll get your insights as well, just quickly here. Bit of a background about Pollinate. So again, we know the kind of what people understand about the circular economy. What kind of things are you seeing and working on directly, kind of innovation projects, etc.?
Cool. I might just get a show of hands as well about who's heard of Pollinate Energy prior to today. 1, 2, 3. All right, cool. About a dozen of you. For those of you that have not come across Pollinate Energy before, we're a charity here in Australia, and we own a social business in India that recruits and trains local micro-entrepreneurs who go door to door in slums in 5 cities now, and they sell life-changing products. So one of the products we sell is a solar lantern, which is replacing kerosene lamps, which are obviously quite bad for health, but also quite bad for our environment. Our social business in India, we are coming up to a point where the lithium batteries in our solar lights are starting to need to be replaced. And so, we're about a year away now from a mountain load of lithium batteries that will start coming through. So for us, what do we do with that waste as a business is a really big question. But our other experience within being on the periphery of the circular economy are the people that we work with, our customers. So in these really highly impoverished urban slums, we've got people who are paper sorters who literally sort shredded paper to weed out the plastic, and they recycle both of those things. We have people who collect soaps from hotels and melt that down into laundry soaps. People who collect scrap metal. So all of these subsistence-based living and working arrangements which are based on recycling waste from the wider economy. So in a lot of ways, we speak about it here, how do we reform our systems and then pass that benefit on? But there's also a lot of lessons to be learned coming from the developing world. So does that kind of give an overview of us and where we sit?
Yeah, absolutely. One question then, working in India and working in Australia, different economies, although India, of course, is growing at a significant rate. What is the different conversations? Because I think replacing something like lanterns, it's very common sense to see that makes sense. Is it a harder conversation here in Australia? Or do you use is your work here mainly raising raising awareness rather than shifting products, for instance?
So the Australian operation at the moment is all about raising funds to support the Indian business. So we operate on a minuscule profit margin to ensure that our pollinators, who are our micro-entrepreneurs, we call them pollinators, to ensure that they've got a really good living wage. So in Australia, Mike, I'm the partnerships and programs manager. I'm not an environmental scientist. I'm not an expert in the circular economy field, but we're all about drumming up enough kind of funds and awareness here in Australia such that the Indian business will one day be financially independent, sustainable, environmentally ethical as well, which is a really big focus on us. Does that cover it?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got some questions that are coming through, so keep sharing them on Twitter as well, tagging in global ideas and #GIF, because we've got them curated here. And the first question actually speaks directly to health, and so this can be to any of you. The idea here is, particularly in the health space, you've got to balance the risk of infection. So there's a lot of products that are designed for an end of life, and then they're incinerated or whatever might be the case. It's a very specific health question, but it refers to bringing in, when you're using IV or when you're using any kind of medical product, often it's designed with full packaging, and it's a linear product because you want to avoid the infection that may come with any kind of circularity. So any insights from that, from any of your expertise working in the space?
So I was reading some stats the other day. 85% of hospital waste is non-hazardous. So that's only 15% of the waste coming out of hospitals is declared hazardous waste. So there's this huge opportunity to actually redesign products considering their end of life. We were at the Australian Industrial Ecology Network conference yesterday, and a firm over in the UK, Ricardo, is working with a health institution to look at sharps containers. Typically, this is they're a single life. You decant your sharp into the container, it all gets incinerated. Huge cost to the hospital, huge cost to the environment. Ricardo firm has now designed reusable receptacles, so they're emptied in not a friendly way, but to reduce risk of sharps injury, and then they're reused. There's no problem with reusing things like this, I suppose. Yeah.
I was just going to mention there's really some leadership right here in Melbourne on this front. Colleague Forbes McGain at one of the hospitals has been such an internal champion for exactly this question with what do we do with hospital waste, or the IV bags, partnering to say how can we recycle those, and that program is now alive globally. So there is change, but it's getting this new niche to change the procedures in large institutions, and that really requires commitment and persistence. So
yeah, can I speak on this one? We've actually, because we identified this, because we're going to hold one of the workshops later, we've brought along some linear products that come straight out of hospitals. We've got an
IDC, so an indwelling catheter insertion kit, just a typical dressing tray that you'd find in any facility. Like I worked in remote area health, but these are across Australia, and an emesis bag.
Yeah, so these currently go direct to landfill, but we were talking to the nurse practitioner, and when she did her training, these were all put through an autoclave. And right now we have things like metal scissors that go direct to landfill, and it's actually not because they can't be sterilised and there's a big proponent of risk. There isn't, and we've just got legislation and regulations that aren't really working to support, the circulation of materials again. So I think this will be a really interesting workshop, how we can look at pure reuse, but actually think beyond that. What else could those products be used for? What other jobs do they have to do?
Great question. I've got one here as well. This idea of, should we have tax break for repairs? Sure. Is there a way to incentivize circularity better in society? Particularly because people don't reuse or recycle because sometimes it's cheaper. You can just buy something straight out of large factories in China or India or across Asia, and it's at such a low cost point. Can people say, well, it's not, I'll just buy this replaceable notion, and they don't really care what happens? How can we that incentivization, I think, is an interesting thing to discover.
I think incentivization is incredibly important. I spent a long time in Indonesia for the last couple of years working in the palm oil space, and living in one of the remote villages in central Java. You can get your shoes repaired. There's a little guy with a scooter, and they can repair all your clothes. Everything gets repaired there, and it's an incredible community. And in Australia, it's quite hard to go find, a shoe repairman now. And we all have our favourites, and you're devastated when they break. And it's a shame that we don't have that system in place. And I think definitely we're looking right now on our street in terms of food waste. If businesses decide to, capture their food waste and put it in the right way through to a composting system, if they can have their rates reduced, because rates are built up on utilities, which is a waste charge. So this is sort of the conversations we're having with our local government through our project, and I definitely think there's a huge incentive there to encourage people to look at alternatives. Anyone else want to talk?
So I'd say yes, really, yes, and I understand. I think Sweden have been looking at this, and so hopefully it's sooner. But who amongst you might help us champion this cause? Our director tells a lovely story of our institute that he was giving. His passion was container deposit legislation. 10 cents on the can of soft drink, happily running along in South Australia for decades, but yet to arrive in New South Wales, starting on the 1st of December. But he gave a lecture on the topic to, I think it was a third-year law student, who later went on to become the Environment Minister in New South Wales, and said, come on, let's get going. So it's unfortunate that sometimes change takes time, but there may well be great ideas that you can take from today and build into your future change creation plans.
Yeah, one thing, coming from South Australia, one thing that I struggle with is just, you can still get plastic bags here in Victoria. And it seems like that regulation space or the policy space just moves at a slower pace than perhaps the entrepreneurship space that I think can be leading this kind of approach. Is that what you're seeing in terms of the circularity experiment across all those 45
Yeah, the legislation, we work with our governments very closely, the state government and also our local council, and they are very slow to move, and which is really challenging. So I would encourage everyone here, whether you're a circular economy expert or not, you can all take action to make change. Janie, look, she's got a nursing background, but she works actively on this street, and we're actually being able to make incredible change for these businesses, but also the community that we're fostering, and the conversations that we do have with local government to challenge the current systems thinking. I think it's just about being positive and passionate, and then putting a plan in place and going after it.
I just want to make a quick comment about that question. Someone said it was cheaper, it costs less to buy new products. We did a waste audit, and we also looked at the council contracting, the council waste charges. So for 6 1,100 litre red top bins that are emptied daily and 17 recycling bins that are emptied 3 times a week, it cost the businesses $75,000 a year. They didn't know this. They had no idea. People say it's cheaper, but they don't factor in the end result, which blew my mind. I was like, what?
Yeah.
This is food for thought.
I think it's the whole notion of where we get our energy from. SA, highest power prices in the world, if you read some of the headlines, for instance. But of course, what are we costing here? And this is the whole notion around, of course, the emissions trading scheme that Australia went for and then backtracked on, and those kind of larger policy pieces, which are interesting. Just take a minute here to take a think about a question you might want to ask as well, because we'll open this up to the audience at this point. And while people are thinking on that, what is, if you were to give a tangible action that you could do, what is the question that these people should be provoking to, people in their spheres of influence as well, to get this circular economy notion better understood and more out there? How do you think about your ... whatever it might be? What's a way for people to move the conversation forward outside this room, for instance?
I think to really challenge people's thinking around, I think a really good one for communities, like we all live in a street, we all have a house, and there's so many assets within there. We don't have big yards here, but in Queensland we have huge big backyards and everyone owns a mower. Most people have a blower as well for the leaves. And it's questioning, why do we each have to have one of those things if we all live in a street right next door to one another, or even kids' toys? So I think a thing we can each do is to actually look around at our assets and say, could I share that? Could that create additional revenue for me? Could I make someone else's day better? I think it's about changing the way you look at in what we live in and the systems we live in, and then starting that conversation with others as well. Questioning your cafe. What do you do with your food waste? Do you know if that cup's recyclable? How much does your waste charge? Because people often, I think there's so many things we don't look at, and we don't look at the full cost. And I think if people start understanding and seeing full transparency in operations, that really starts you thinking.
Luke, anything to add there?
Yeah, so I grew up in Queensland. I've been in Melbourne for 5 years now, and I miss the big backyards. And I guess growing up, we had chickens. We had some seasonal, like we had mango and passion fruit and a whole lot of stuff that we grew in our own backyard. Got solar as soon as we could afford it. So making all those simple decisions, also the tougher decisions, I think is really important. I currently live in a place we've got ducted heating, which is amazing for a Queenslander to have ducted heating down here. But I know it's run by gas, and so I've started up a little kitty so I can get a more energy efficient and more reliable heating source. So there's lots of personal decisions, and a lot of the times they actually feel like a sacrifice. Like, I actually had a pair of shoes break a few months ago. Finding a good shoe repairer was a process, took about a week to find someone that was like, yep, I trust you. And then the process in terms of my time was like a half an hour cycle there, half an hour cycle back. Cost me $80. I could have bought a pair of new shoes on ASOS in the same amount of time. So at the time it was frustrating, but yeah. I had shoes that I was going to reuse. They fit my brother, he's borrowed them. So it's sharing, it's making those tough decisions that might seem more difficult at the time, but will have some payoff.
Fantastic. Love it. I like the work of Patagonia as well, which are a B Corp. And you can buy anything from Patagonia, and they offer a lifetime repair on that. In fact, they even repair clothes that aren't Patagonia. Yeah, they're a great company because they're kind of starting to say this is possible, you can be profitable and also have these positive environmental impacts as well.
Our current, GDP, it's all on consumption. And when you're measuring consumption, and the more the better, it's always going to fail you in terms of measuring actual sustainable growth, I think. If anyone else wants to.
I think the way we look at value systems has to change. It's not just purely economic, and this was definitely a theme in every conversation I've had on the circular economy. And if I was to describe it in my own personal view, the circular economy is about community in every essence. That's looking at a total global context, looking just at a street, or just you between another person. It's how we build community and look at the social, economic, and environmental. And I think that's what we need to start looking at when we talk about value for a country and value for people.
I think it's a really important question, and I agree. And I think we focus on GDP, national accounts, but we need a national system also of environmental accounts to understand where the ABS funding was cut. We had a trial waste account, and then it sort of dropped off the radar. So just knowing where we stand, I think, is a really important part of fostering this. It might have been Ian Lowe who said that he was talking about steady state economy, and he said one of the reasons people could be nervous about saying goodbye to this idea of future economic growth is because it brings the question of inequality into such sharp relief. Because if it's not growing in future, then if you've got more and I've got less, then that's really something to address. That
idea of competition, I think, is something that's interesting. The idea of scarcity versus abundance. And I don't know about the rest of you, I try to be an optimist about exponential technology as being able to create, a world of abundance where we don't, for me to win, you can also win, rather than having to be a zero-sum lost-win sort of equation. I think that's really interesting.
For me, it all comes back to the diversion, especially with the solar lantern, the diversion away from kerosene. So initially, these lights are purchased over a payment plan. So a person will sign up to buy one, they'll receive it immediately, and they start paying that off over kind of 5 to 7 or 12 weeks. During that time, they're probably going to be spending around maybe 10 to 15% more on the repayments than they would have on kerosene. And so that's the hard sell. We're asking them to spend more to basically have they've got much better lighting, but to have light, which they, to this point, have thought, oh, this is fine, the kerosene. So that discussion, a lot of the time, doesn't hit at the health aspect. This kerosene is killing you. It doesn't hit at the quality of the light. It hits at the economics, and that's, you're going to spend an extra 30, 50, 60 rupee a week with this, but in a year you're going to save 5,000 rupee, which is a really substantial amount. So I think giving people that, I think not treating them as equal, give them all the information and let them come to their own conclusion based on the facts that you provide. I think it's really, you'll be very careful, especially coming from us in the West, going to other countries that are at different stages in their development cycle and dictating what they can and cannot do. And the fact that India signed up to the Paris Agreement is amazing because, a very valid point that is often put forward by the Indian Energy Minister is that the West has had 150 years to benefit from coal. They've only had 50 years. And, where is the equality in their consumption? So, it's a question with a question. So.
I've got one here as well from Twitter. And it relates, I think, to individualism and the notion of it. So the whole idea, one of the, I think, challenges for the sharing economy is that it changes the notion of ownership. And rather, if we live in such a hyper-individualistic world, that's, I think, one of the kind of challenges we might see there. So we can all take action to make change at individual level, but obviously it's the community and the collaborative commons, perhaps, as well. And I like this element as well to throw in there, particularly on information. With the internet, we're moving from information scarcity to information abundance, which I think is a fantastic, positive part of the internet. So how can digital technology make us more circular? Is there an app for that?
This is a really good question. Digital technology, I don't think there's any one app or one silver bullet, but I think it's a tool. Like, again, we were at an event a couple of nights ago and it was a really heated debate. We had 4 ex-business leaders on the panel, and technology got brought up, and a woman in the audience got quite fiery, and she said, no, technology is a conduit for creating connection. It's a tool about it, because, like if you read the dialogue these days, it's we're more connected digitally than ever, but rates of suicide are skyrocketing and feelings of isolation again are through the roof. So I think we have to be mindful about how we use technology as a tool and not the only way to connect, I suppose. Yeah.
In working in this space, as everyone said, we've right now got a service model, and everyone wants it to be a tech model, make it once, sell it 1 billion times and generate all this revenue. And often technology is seen as the silver bullet. It can carry so much education. Yes, it does connect us. We can look at whole systems through it, input-output modeling. It's so important. But it's one element, and I think it's really important to look at a connection between individuals and conversation. Reading information on your iPad on your own isn't as good as having a really in-depth conversation with a human being, and you get the really emotional feel from it. If you really wanted to understand, climate change impacts, talk to someone that's gone through it, that maybe lost their farm. I think reading it on news, we can often become quite disconnected, and I think so human connection is essential to this.
I'd only just quickly add that it's strengthening that culture that's less about me here now, but more about others elsewhere and tomorrow. And the area where I see digital can play a really nice role is in provenance or understanding the supply chain. If you can see a face of the person that might have mined the things to put in the smartphone and have confidence that then at the end of its life there is a pathway through to reuse and second life, whilst still being mindful of the rate we're circulating. We don't want to move to sort of guilt-free consumption. Doesn't matter if you get a new phone every 3 weeks sort of thing. Yeah. But that connected story, I think digital can help with. Yeah,
Icebreaker does that quite well. As an example, where you can, on the barcode of their product, and I'm sure there's other companies, you can quite literally go onto the link and see the farm from where the wool came from in New Zealand. So it's that link, I think that provenance link, I think is really fascinating.
It's brilliant. And I think blockchain technology, I'm not sure if many people in the room probably heard of it, that's going to be a huge thing in terms of that transparency. What we can really see, what we have knowledge on now, and we can make as consumers really conscious decisions on where we put our dollar, because that's what speaks volumes.
Sorry, and just quickly on blockchain, there's the benefit of digital. 2 points. Everyone's heard of Bitcoin and other digital cryptocurrencies. So there's a mob out in Canada that have just launched a cryptocurrency for the social impact world called Impact Finance, IMPAK. So I bought some. It's my first foray into digital money. It was scary, but the hope is that they've just raised $1 million Canadian dollars. The hope is that they'll build a digital economy around businesses that are doing good or businesses that have purpose, which is really exciting. But with the other thing, it's kind of a poison chalice technology, and I'd probably challenge everyone to just turn it off for the day if you're going to be going through all these workshops. And as corny as it sounds, like trying to look someone in the eye for 30 seconds, it sounds really kitschy now because there's that telly show that's just come on where they do that. They try to solve everyone's issues by looking into each other's eyes. But actually, I can attest to it. It is pretty powerful to actually try to get to know someone beyond the phone, beyond even a conversation, because it really opened up a different world.
Yeah. Susan Pinker talks about the village effect and how there really still is no replacement for human-to-human interaction. As much, the paradox of technology is it can connect us, can humanize and dehumanize at the same time. Hence online trolling and everything else in those kind of realms.
So in Indonesia, I adored their community systems that they had established. So a typical street in Indonesia, they'll have a monthly meeting. The men will meet in a group and have discussion on, what's important for the community, what do they want to see happen in the next month. They'll also have the women get together and have a discussion as well. And I think we obviously don't do that. A lot of us don't know our neighbour. Who knows their next door neighbour's name on either side? On both sides, sorry. Okay. But yeah, not bad. But see, in Indonesia, they know everybody. I mean, there's a lot of little whisperers and everyone knows everyone's business, so it has that downside. But I think that the community paradigm that they have there is so, so strong. And there's such a help. If you need, it used to be back in the old day, not that, I'm not that old, but you could get the cup of sugar, you can borrow the milk, and we really had a strong essence of, companionship between a community setting. I think if we were able to bring at least some of that back in and make time for one another, true time to get to know who's beside you, next to you, even down the street, I think that's really, really important. And I think there's so much we can learn from those societies and how they function.
I completely agree with everything that you've just said, and I think there's a lot of similarities in India. I personally can only speak from the communities that I've visited and that Pollinate works in. So these are the urban slums. So I'm not too sure how it goes in more rural areas, but I imagine it'd be quite the same. But from a personal experience I had in Kolkata, we walked into a community of about 100 homes with our pollinator and a couple of local Indian students who were helping out with this project. And immediately they recognised us by the yellow shirts that we wear when we go into communities. And they knew from seeing us who had bought products and where that person was at that particular time and was in the community or at work, and they were able to say, oh, Rajesh, he's actually just ducked out. Do you need to see him? We can go find him. Like, no, we're just here to see such and such. Okay, let's go. And it's always 2 or 3 people that just know what's happening in their community. What that kind of triggered for me when I came back to Melbourne, I realised that the majority of my friends and family are back up north in Queensland. And yeah, I don't know my neighbours. And so I moved out. I'm in a new place now, and I've been there a week and I've met all my neighbours. So you don't have to necessarily move house to get that solution. But yeah, look, back to your question of replicating those systems. I think it's really important that we move towards more kind of a community-based knowledge process. And to the earlier question, we spoke about the individualism, potentially coming from technology or coming with technology. It's finding that balance between community, technology, being an individual, but also being reliant on your network of care.
Great, I've got one online question here, and then maybe we'll take one more from the audience, and then we'll start to wrap up. The question is, can we achieve a circular economy without strong government intervention, regulatory frameworks, policies, institutional change, etc.? And of course, the short-term political cycle, which sometimes means short-term pain, is never on the agenda, even if it has significant long-term gain as well. So particularly the entrepreneurial space, can it be disrupted, just simply driven by that space, or how do we need to play across those different spheres of influence?
I think the short answer is no. We do need legislation and policy to support this, but just on our tiny little scale, so we work at one street with 45 businesses, and there are things that we require from the local government, whether it's a tick of approval or whatnot. So Ashley spoke about the ballot box earlier, the gamification of the cigarette litter. So that's a yellow box, like this big. It's really innovative. It asks, like, is Donald Trump's hair real? Yes, no, and you vote with your cigarette butt. Okay?
You can ask whatever you want.
It's a really cool thing, and like our community's been really positive. However, our local government, we delivered it to them, and we were partnered with Keep Australia Beautiful to get this service, and we got an email a week and a half ago that said, I'm sorry, you know, like, we love this idea, we're so supportive, however, yellow is not in our colour scheme plan. I'm sorry. No word of a lie. Despite all this evidence to suggest this is what the community consultation period wanted, this reduces cigarette litter exponentially, that didn't matter to them. And this is not the first time that we've come up against barriers. And so I think we get really frustrated because we're like, you just need to get out of your own way sometimes. And so we just carry on, really. And I don't know if that's the best approach, but that's the approach we're taking until people in government or the majority of government really see the circular economy as the way forward. I think they might be slow to move. However, our experience with our Queensland government has been vastly different. They're really, our state government, they've a lot of the people we've dealt with, which is in energy, water and waste, climate change, biofutures, they're a younger demographic, and they seem really motivated and excited, and that includes the Environment Minister, Dr. Stephen Miles. He's written us a statement of support, and so, I don't know, I feel like tides are changing, it's just taking time.
Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that is I think legislation serves a really important part in terms of creating markets. Now, if we're going to look with this linear model right now, we have such a large amount of waste in so many different sectors. So it's all well and good to collect that. And what we see, if you did watch the Four Corners Trashed episode, you'll see the mountains of glass. And there's like for us, this is a hot night spot, the street we work on, so it produces a lot of glass waste. So we phoned around everywhere. What can we do with the glass waste? Can we get it, re-embedded into other industries? Can it, just be upcycled, recycled? And then there's only one glass factory in Queensland that owns the monopoly, and they're from America. They're $1 billion company, and they just do imports and just put it into landfill. So I think for a government, and a thing they could do is regulate to say 20% has to go into industry, or or make a incentive for industry to use it in whatever respect that is. And I think so the creation of marketplaces is where legislation can really support.
I would echo those comments and think we do need the legislation, but we don't necessarily need it first. There's leadership from SMEs, there's leadership from bigger businesses, and it's about us all saying this is important, and then I think the government will listen. Currently there's a review of the Product Stewardship Act that says, what do we do end of life for televisions and computers? Hooray to Queensland for leading the charge on funding. They funded some work we did to say, well, how do we start this conversation in solar panels and end-of-life batteries, and Victoria is now carrying that forward. So having a voice, but I think not waiting for government to act is a useful path.
I think there's definitely groupthink in all levels of government, both the people that we elect, or probably hopefully none of us elected, and also the public service. And I think sometimes the path of least resistance is often taken, which leads to things that don't consider diversity or a whole range of environmental issues. I think on that note, and maybe this was my sentence early, it's you've got to get angry and get loud and get provocative. You need certain sections of a society taking up certain roles. Maybe you're the type of person who goes inside an organisation and tries to restructure it and create a circular economy or change people's minds person by person. Maybe you're someone who's going to go throw a brick through the window of a bank and really protest against neoliberalism and all that represents. So there's kind of all those different extremes. I think the best place is to start with yourself, figure out where you sit in that extreme, and then direct your efforts in that sense. And so if you've brought up our parliamentarians across all the local council and state and federal. If that's where your interest is and that's where your passion for change lies, all right, well, let's join one of those parties. Let's try to reform it. Or if it's not reforming one of them, let's join one where we can attack one of the major ones, or become a staffer to a Liberal and slowly bring them into the world of environmental reality. Not all of them, but some of them. So there's a whole lot of different pathways there.
Great, thanks, Luke. Janie, to finish up, your sentence.
Oh, it's a quote. 'Cause that's how we roll. We're a quote a minute here. This is pinned on Ash's bedroom, which is our office. So it says, it's from Barack Obama, and it says, "Change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek." Like I came into this in no way as a circular economy expert or economist or environmental anything. I'm a nurse. I was a nurse. I'm a nurse. Love it. But, like it's so empowering to look at the change that we've made just because we really care. Like we don't get paid for what we do. We are unfunded. We're doing this, we started in March and we're doing a proof of concept until December. And it is incredible. And just the people that have come on board along the way because they believe in us and what we do. It's like we've created this little army of people who give a shit, and it's so nice. It's so nice. So
we wouldn't be sitting here today if we didn't have a go at this. So I would encourage you all to believe in yourself and go for it.
Damien, finish us off.
Mine would be to be brave in fostering a culture that thinks beyond shiny. And in a small way, it might be giving a second-hand gift with a story and making that a part of what can become normal.
Brilliant. So I've got nothing to add except to thank these amazing 4 change agents who are working hard on this topic. Thank you so much for being here.